today's tool, I'm going to use a mechanical pencil. I have a fountain pen with just any ink pen, really, if you have microns. What I want you to do is explore some of this illustration type style, whether it's pencil, pen, ink, color pencil, and of course I'm going to use a little bit of color with watercolor or color pencil as well. So for the first one, I'm just going to go ahead and grab a pencil. And what I wanted to show you was a quick warm-up study. If you remember, this was our last subject. We saw her last week, and I wanted to show you a new way. So for negative space, just to recap, I would take my pencil and I would look for, and I'm going to go ahead and look at this one. See if you guys can go ahead and follow along with me and see if you recognize where this negative space that I just drew fits. And you may say, I think I see it. And if I were to add the other side of it, you immediately know where it goes. And again, I'm just following the negative space with a little more precision when you go slow. So there, you recognize where this goes. And then that would take me to another negative space that may have a little bit of a shape like this. And it's how to switch your brain, the way you see things, from focusing on the actual shape of the subject to the actual shape of the space around it. So I find this a very, very helpful tool, a very helpful method. And before you know it, it just pieces together. And you'll see, I'm just going to go ahead and work at a little bit of a faster pace as I just focus on negative space and also the relationships between the elements. And you can really abstract this, creating your own quality of line. And also looking at both the negative space and the shape of your subject to kind of confirm your decision making when you're working with lines. So this is all about line work. So today, and there it is. Basically we have, if I were to just pencil in a little bit of the negative space, you see our subject. And I kind of avoided the thing that we all try to avoid. So let's go for that little shape here. Negative space. And it's always hands and feet that we kind of avoid. But it's simplified. And there we have it. So this is a quick, not even a 5-minute sketch, just a recap of what we did with negative space, contour, line drawing, and how to begin to use that to stylize it. So to that, I want to add this. And I hope everybody can just take a quick look at the screen. Because to this method, the negative space contour drawing, I want you to begin to look at it like this. Did you see what happened there? So all I'm doing is I'm taking the color out of our subject, which is another way of abstracting it. And here I am looking at something which is notan. It's a Japanese word that means light and shadow. So I'm just going to go ahead and flip this page around. Not this one. And what if I were to apply that negative contour shape drawing into the light shadow drawings? So I'm going to try something very, very quickly here. See if it works. Yes, there it is. So you're looking at the image. There it is. And what I want you to do is, if I were to zoom in, and I'm going to zoom in like right over here, I begin to see shapes. We still identify this as our brain is just so amazing and we see a face. But your job today is to look closely at some of these shapes. And let me go ahead and switch back over here. And as you see it on screen, try to simplify and identify some of those shapes that you can then, using that negative space, the negative contour drawing technique that we used, begin to apply it. And I'm just going really, again, this is just a warm-up exercise for you to kind of grasp the concept. And I'm doing just a quick analysis of the shapes. Now, here's what happens. When you're working with shapes within, I'm going to say the word, a face, something that's very recognizable, your left brain tries to take over. And you take shortcuts. You unwillingly make decisions that then seem like, wait, why doesn't it look like the shape that I was trying to draw? And that happens when we lose our focus from looking at it as a shape and allowing the decision making to be taken over by the symbol of it. So there we have it. A very quick, and I'm looking at something that is usually very difficult. The shape begins to get a little more and more complex. And overall, obviously, we're not going to just silhouette this into black and white. We would be using this to create a little bit of the difference between the shapes of light and shadow. How the shape just takes over. And remember, I'm working somewhat in a realistic style, let's call it. But see, if I begin to use that negative shape method by only looking at these shapes of shadows, you are going to have so much fun as you're developing your drawings. Notice this one here. This is beautiful. No edge. But this one comes in, points me at the direction here, meets here, and then this shape right here. As I just take a quick look at it and decide to place it in. We begin to have something that it's just supposed to be that really, really fun. Now, some of these shapes get a little more complex, a little more, you would call them descriptive, like detailed. Oh, well, it's a knuckle. No, it is still a thinner, maybe longer shape of shadow. It is in the process of you really just staying focused on what that actual shape looks like. Forgetting the thing that it's supposed to describe. And there we have it. So it begins to get a little more specific. But I want you to, it's step 2 of what we did last week. And oh my gosh, that was perfect timing. I allotted 15 minutes for this. And just doing very quick studies, very quick sketches with a subject that was familiar to us. Because last week, we took this and we added a little bit of color to it. And how much easier is it going to be when I just take my color pencils, my watercolor, or my whatever I chose, to really just take this drawing and begin to apply a little bit of stylistic, illustrative approaches to it. If you're working with ink, you are going to be looking at strategies. So I would say, okay, this is the top of my head, and I'm going to maybe visualize straight down. It's going to probably be around here where my feet, and I'm just making small marks. I'm seeing a triangular shape that points right towards the hands. And this angle, a little bit sharper. And I notice that this hand is also higher than the left, or in this case, her right about here. And just by giving myself these little pointers, I could begin to kind of assemble it, just really begin to have my markers as I see my first shape. I'm going to keep them loose. I'm going to keep them somewhat linear. Notice that these shapes in here that describe hair are just shapes. And that's what you want to consistently keep thinking of. Now remember, stylistically, I want you guys to, I'm going to do a few different ones as well. Here I'm going for that little bit more realistic, more accurate looking. But I want you guys to play with simplicity. I saw some beautiful samples last week. I want you to begin pushing the boundaries of that style that you enjoy. So there we go. We have beautiful shapes of shadow right in here. And again, if you can, just get a little closer to it. Just simplifying it with a little line and a dot would do better than trying to resolve it even. It's saying it with less. Less is more, definitely. In this case, absolutely. And we want to resolve this shape here, which is more peculiar because it's going to give the expression. So how do I get away from thinking this is that thing? I don't want to say the word because then you can't unsee it. And just focus on that those little shapes of shadow. There it is. That's how simply. You really have to make an effort to refocus. And the thought, as you're drawing those lines, is what's crucial. And in many cases, it's no thought. When you begin thinking of, I guess it's kind of like levels. Think of a pool, and it's a deep pool. And you could be on the surface of it floating, or you could go really, really, really deep. And that's where I really want you to go as deep as possible when you're focused on that shape, to really look at all of it. Meaning, of course you know what it's representing, but you're going to forget about it for a second because you're looking at negative space, looking at the contour, looking at the relationship of it. And here you're saying, but you're drawing the face. No, I'm piecing it together, and now I'm combining a little bit of that negative space with this notan technique. A little bit slower, working on both sides, because I'm also trying to use that relationship. And trying to capture just that. Shapes by using whatever makes it easier. Now I'm seeing that this is going to be a little bit further out. Well, I make my correction. Now this is a very, very interesting, very beautiful shape here of light. So there we have it. So I'm looking at the shape of light, and at the same time, a little bit at the outside of it, the shape of that shadow. And when I say shadow, I mean what we have as black and white here. And now I know from the previous image that there's a lot of, that's where this notan would be good to take it back. Because here we notice, we have shapes inside. But what I want you to focus on this is how much simpler this becomes as soon as I click on this. Obviously, we lose all the detail that's inside of there. So what I'm looking for mostly is just that general, simplest shape. I'm not looking to do any detail yet. So obviously, I'm not going to draw it. I'm going to save it because we will go back to the previous, the full rendered, full color image. And now I'm going to go a little bit more into that negative space contour drawing. Still looking at those shapes. And in the end, this comes down to what actually feels right for you. We all see different things. We all see them in different ways. You need to learn what is the way you choose to look at things and what is the easiest way you can use that way of looking to make your drawings better. So all of these techniques, some may help you, some may actually make your drawings way stronger. Well, then guess what? You're going to want to do those more and explore them. How can I make this even more efficient for me? And then you do that. Here we're going to go right into these beautiful shapes here. Very subtle because we know what they represent. So I'm looking almost exclusively at negative space. Very nice, beautiful shapes here. We have a nice, notice this little gray area here, which should be a mid-tone. There's going to be a little light there. Coming together, again, into negative space. And then having that sense of confidence. Confidence in your lines. There is nothing more satisfying than knowing you could draw any line that you see. And that's all they are. Lines in a variety of shapes describing, in this case, light and shadow. And when you begin to develop that confidence, the sky's the limit. There we go. So I'm going to add a little more ink to this area since I know it's going to be a little darker. Let's go ahead and finish these over here. A little extra elements that will complete our pose, our figure. More shapes of shadow in here. And the reason I like using this pen is because I could bring in a little bit of water after the fact, and it does this. It creates these. It's water soluble. So if you have a pen, Micron is not. So with a water soluble pen, you can create these beautiful washes. So discovering also what kind of pen should I use? Should I just stick to pencil? Is that going to be rich enough? Is it going to give me that look? Do I enjoy this? If not, you don't. I'm just demoing it, showing you the variety. And there's tons of pens that are beautiful with all kinds of different inks. Some are a little browner, some are a little bluer, some are a little blacker. So even that, the quality of the wash with the quality of the ink that you decide to use, and also the type of pen. Because notice that I was using that fountain pen. It delivers a quality of line that I really enjoy. And this will eventually dry very quickly, by the way. And I can come back and do a couple extra washes on it. Add color, watercolor, color pencil, you name it. And begin to create what I'm hoping you guys explore, which is stylistic drawing. So you really push the figure and the clothing where you want it, how you want it to look. And I mentioned last week we saw a few samples that I absolutely loved. The key is always looking for a little more simplicity And I'm just kind of reworking some of these very carefully. The shapes are pretty complete. The ink is so... Lifting a little bit of water, because I could actually lift a little bit of that light right back up. That actually looks pretty good. So if we were to wait for this to dry just a little bit, I would then go, hopefully everyone's finished with this, so I could go back to the color and then select nice velvety. That looks like a... I'm not too good with fabrics, but it kind of a... I guess that's the word, velvety kind of look to the fabric. And I'm going to try to stick to what I saw earlier, the reading of light and shadow. And now look how much clearer you begin to see a lot of these lights and shadows in here. It's always good to have a paper towel at hand when you're working wet on wet to lift. Play a little more. And even further, just a little darker area right over here. And obviously when you're working wet on wet, you have to do this in stages. You don't want to risk an area that's wet that could just bleed into the other color. So allowing a little time in between. And then playing with a few of your favorite techniques. Just to rework it. Just a little bit of color right here in the face. So there's one technique. Water-soluble ink with a wash. And a little bit of watercolor. And this would take a little couple, one or two extra layers to really develop the quality of color, textures. But it actually becomes really, really fun. And looking back at where we started with just those simple shapes, got to be happy with it. All right, here we go. Put it aside. Just prepping my next paper. And we're going to go to our next subject. So here we are. That's our notan. So our next subject is right here. Taking a look at it, make some mental notes of, interesting. What's the first thing that stands out? And obviously the pink hair and the flower she's holding, but the leather jacket and that kind of tutu, kind of wedding dress looking. But overall, the boots and the leather jacket, very cool. And how would I just implement that? We're still going to look at it this way. So, not that way. Sorry. This way. So going back to notan, look how it simplifies this. What I want to really highlight here is when you're looking at this subject and you were ready to draw it, would you be able to see this? Especially in the face, what is essential as light and shadow. And mind you, there is a lot of variety, nuance. But I do want you to simplify it to this point. So what am I going to choose for this one? We can go back to a quick pencil drawing that I'll then ink with some micron pens. You could go straight to micron pens as well, but I want to do it right. I want to give this a nice gesture. So I am going to, once again, make my measurements. Figure's going to be here in the center. It's about full page. So my first marking is here at the top. That's height. This is how low I can go. And just in relationship, proportion to this, I'll probably be going, I'm making a measurement right about here for this side. And right about here for the other. Somewhat. A little bit higher, actually. I could also add a little bit of, if we saw this previous, another drawing method, I could add a few very light, and I want to show you how light. You can barely see them, but they're there just for the size of the head. Can you see it? Because I want to keep these lines light. That way I don't have to erase too much. And what I'm going to look for is the relationship to big joints, the shoulder, the other shoulder that seems to be a little bit lower at an angle, the torso, elbow. I don't even see it, but we see it in relationship to the shoulder, and from there to the hand. So I'm basically creating an armature. The hip area, and then obviously we don't see the legs, but I can visualize and kind of see where the knee and the other knee would land, and bring me to the ankles and feet. So I have a nice armature going on. Very, very light, but you could see it. And that's going to give me just enough confidence for me to take my ink pen. In this case, it's going to be a micron. And to go for the drawing. So once again, we have the answers. If you can literally just copy this look, that would be amazing. You would have an excellent drawing. Light and shadow shapes, if you could get really, really close to them. How do we get these up here? So I'm going to start right at the top. I'm going to look at that shape. And there's tiny little shapes that break out and kind of give us the full feel of what it is interacting with. After all, it is light, and light is how we see things. Think about that for a second. No light, we don't see anything. So it's light and how it interacts with the thing we're looking at. So sometimes we have light that reflects, light that absorbs, light that, in this case with this hair here, how it interacts with it, it kind of breaks in and out, creating shadow areas. And it's streaky. But here's a beautiful shape. This is going to be my first major shape with the little wavy and breaks of light inside of it. So it almost feels like you're drawing hair, but not really. You're still just focusing on those tiny little marks as best as you can see them. And here you can also use all the other techniques. So for example, I'm using hatching. Hatching is just this parallel, streaky lines that are going to, once I cross over the pattern, becomes darker value. So I want that look. And immediately, instead of just filling it in, I could create a little bit of light, or the illusion of light coming through. Really paying attention to the form. A little bit of that negative space coming through. How do I see it? Where do I look for it? We have a really nice expression here. And I know it seems tricky, but you could simplify. You could just see it, see the shape, avoid making up information, because we all know what's happening here. We've all felt this feeling. We recognize it. But can you focus so much on the actual details of these individual little shapes that with just these very few marks you could create that feeling, create that expression that we're going, all of us, to recognize. I'm breaking these excuse me, small little shapes of shadows, staying away excuse me, from the feeling of I know what it is, I'm going to draw that thing, but instead really just trying to copy the shape that you see in front of you. Completely simplified, without having to add too much information. This one gets tricky because there's a lot of breaks of light and shadow in between. So we do that. And the other thing is we don't judge our drawing. Our shape, we can see if it's the right size, if it's the right angle, and if it fits the shapes that we were looking at. If it follows those three things, the size, the shape, and in this case, it becomes kind of easier because it's just one value. It's dark. So that's it. So you could see how that right there, just by piecing those little shapes together, and I am putting a little too much attention to this, but I wanted to, something like this is usually where we get caught up and we lose that focus. We make up information and then we lose a little bit of that mindset that I want you to stick with, which is simplified, simplified, simplified. I'm going to go ahead and start moving with a little looser line into some of these areas. There's a lot of detail, and that's another thing. When you have lots of detail, we tend to get caught up in that. So loosen it up. Go for the style of it. There's lots of breaks of light and shadow here. So I'm going to go ahead and just loosen up my line, have it more expressive instead of descriptive. Have it a little more expressive. Go back to negative contour drawing, just for the outside, as I see breaks of light coming in and out. I have a good read into the placement, I feel. And then the other decision is, how much detail do I want to add to this? You could simplify it to the point where you will recognize it. And I think I'll do that one next. A very, very simplified read. Some people would say, well, that looks too cartoony. It could be very cartoony, but you could still recognize even the person. Identify the person, which is in the end what we want. So it's a stylistic decision, but the information that you're going to convey, that's what matters. Now we do have lots of information in here. I'm going to save that for later when we go back to the color image. I'm beginning to see these big spots of light. Leave those untouched with a couple of specks of breaks in what I know it's leather. Bring us over to this side where we see a beautiful shape of negative space, but it's light. So we work with light. A shape of light, a shape of shadow, and all of it starting to come together. And then you realize, I guess that's what I'm doing. I'm just coming up with ways to use descriptive lines arranged in a way, in a shape, even with the pace that give out kind of that sensation that read and the amount of information that I get to decide. And that is the moment when you realize you could do any type of line decision that you wish to, because it is absolutely all the way up to you. We lose information here into the blank, but we do have lots of information here. That's going to be, I know, most of it all flowers. So I'm just looking at some of those shadows and adding scumble lines. And there's a glove here, I guess. Not much of the hand. So we'll keep it at that. Go back into this area, missing out a few things. And then we see some lettering. Again, going back to what and how you decide to show us that information. Let me go ahead and finish here at the bottom before we move back to the color image, which you'll see it is much more demanding in terms of focus, how you're going to be able to see it, and you won't be able to see it as clear as you see it in this format. And the key would be for us to learn to see the things we're drawing like this. Even if you're out in the real world, live, drawing from life, you would want to see dark. So lights, shadows first, then the shape of those lights and shadows, and then arrange them. Adding your personal style, your touch to it. There we have it. Let me go back to the color image, and that way we could put some of that extra information in there. So there it is. Not much. There's not big shifts. So the only one I would see is this here, where I could just finish up this part. Obviously we have this missing, which I'd rather see it. I missed it on the Notan version. And we have just a few touches of light, shadow that hint at fingers. And there you have it. Just the right amount of information that will give you that look, what you're looking for. Interesting. I can't tell what this is here. But there you go. Even this I get to make up how I want. Now, the reason I wanted to go back to the color image here is I thought it was going to be more information here, but there isn't. So I'm just going to go ahead and add More crosshatch. Make this darker. A little more hair here. She has that hair coming over the face. So making sure we have that read. More crosshatch. Extra areas of dark. And once I'm at this stage, I'm going to go back to watercolor. I mean, color pencil, it would be a great way. Why not? Let's just stick with color pencil for this one. I'm just going to go to some color pencils here, and I'm going to add just touches of color. What I think has to be done here, just so it stands out. Switch back over to this one. And it all comes down to technique, decisions, with color application, how you decide to do those. Maybe even go back into what I consider some of that dark area and actually use some color pencil in there where I can contrast it. Make sure it doesn't really affect the lines that we already have on there. But this comes down to what is your technique with color pencil. I'm just filling in color here, trying to add a little value. Variation with some of these colors, but not much. It's very loose. And actually for this one I wanted to use a little bit of a darker mix of black and blue. Because you're in charge, so you get to choose your color palette as well. Now if this is something that you like, and I mean ink and color pencil, I like ink and watercolor. It's one that I like a lot. So here I'm going to actually save a little bit, just a little touch of color there. A little color here. And here. And there we have it. So very loose. Stylistically, I actually enjoy this kind of drawing. It does take some accuracy to get some of those lines, and you can begin to see where you could make very easily some decisions that could take this in very easily two directions. Whether it's more gestural, more illustration-like, or more realistic, more accuracy. Looking for more accuracy. So there we go, number 2. And go back to number 1, where now would be the time to add that. Let's go ahead and do it as we, why not bring back a little bit of this color here. So here you see how I could add layers of light, and it would take just that little extra time to allow it to dry just a touch, and just have those in this case more elaborate techniques. Very not elaborate, but apply them in the way they're supposed to. In this case, with a little time to dry. So there's 1, there's 2. So number 3, I've selected our third image. And that would be girl with the hat and a dress. It's a little simpler pose. This I saved for last because I really want you to take a look at the screen. If I were to just leave this up, would you be able to see and read the notan, the light and shadow? Would you be able to? Has it been helping you? Do you see it better? Can you stylistically apply it to get a much fuller version of this drawing? So as you look at this, I want you to really just stare at it for a second. Can everyone stare at this for just 1 second? Actually, like 10 seconds. And I'm going to do something. When you're looking at this, you're looking for light, shadow. And I'm going to show it to you. Woof, there it is. So if you were looking at the face or neck or arms or even at the dress, I'll do it again. How effectively were you seeing the lights and shadows? And when you learn to see it like this, because there it is. Now when you look at it like this, I hope you can begin to see it. What stands out about those markers? And there's nothing tricky I'm doing to these photos. It literally is light, shadow division, the level of it, 50-50. And whatever's in the light is white. Whatever's in the shadows is black. Now the intensity of that black, you see how it breaks in certain areas? Like right underneath the shadow of the neck into the chest, it begins to break into smaller pieces. That's because there's less intensity in that shadow. But it is a cast shadow. So here we are. So remembering those colors, using the notan, we're going to go ahead and do our drawing. Now for this one, I think I'm going to go back to, let's see, this one is, it's so nice and fluffy. Like nice and light. There's a lot of pattern in the dress. So I might want to keep it with pencil. And I think that's what I'm going to do. So once again, I start with my composition. I am going to look at my markers, put her in the center. So there's my top. I could begin to do some shapes, very loose drawing. I could literally see this drawing as pretty much, and I'll show you here in another way, this. Can you see that? It's pretty much a triangular shape like this that I could then begin to kind of put together with smaller pieces. But it is all contained within that triangular shape. And now how this lines up, we could begin to just very simply piece it together. So for actually this is going to be a little too long. I made it a little too big. My feet are not going to fit well here. It's going to be a little shorter. I might have made this a little too big. Proportion of my head is just a little too big. So everything's going to shift just a little. And what we said last week, we can stylize this. So I could give her a little more hip action. A little more, and she's got a pose going. So I could exaggerate it just a little bit. Turn the shoulders high, low, a little higher, a little lower before I begin to do all that. Definition of, I could put this foot a little more forward or a little more out. And as you begin to see this, I could add curves to that dress. More wind to it, more movement, more dynamic. So you have the freedom to be inspired by this reference and be able to do anything with it. So I'm beginning to push it into that simpler style, as I said I would. I might have to switch over to pen so you could see it a little bit better. I could make, usually a thing that really looks great is the neck becomes a little bit longer. It stylizes your entire, between neck and spine, what you do with the spine and the torso here, it creates an automatic look of fashion, like fashion pose kind of thing. But that's what you want to look for. So there we have it. It's already, you could almost, with the information I provide you here, you could almost already see it. You see the whole movement and rhythm of it. So I'm going to move to my notan study. And I'm going to begin, like I do pretty much, biggest to smallest. But here we have those immediate shapes that I could read. I'm going to use a permanent ink. It's kind of like my Micron, but it's a fountain pen that gives me a different quality of line. I could adjust the pressure and get a different value of line. There we go. For example, here I see a little dip in this line. You want to, when you do, and I use the word exaggerate, you want to be cautious how much. It's interesting to see how far you're willing to go, knowing that you could do anything to those lines. It's really interesting to see how far you're willing to do that. But there's always a limit. Or is there? So once again, I'm working at the outer contour kind of edges of the shapes of these shadows, and I'm trying to get a good read on what I think it's that perfect shape that sets us up, and it's that cast shadow right here underneath the face. Now, I could choose to do it with ink, and it's been so heavy, I could also save it for color. So if I were using watercolor here, I may just hint at the shadows. And then actually work it in with color. This entire arm and shoulder area here, shoulder into the arm, it's in shadows. And then we have beautiful little shapes with patterns on it from the dress, cutting into going right into the light. Finishing some of these lines as I have this complete. Beginning to get just a few more accurate reads here with great contrast between light and shadow here in the background. Also, another decision on how to deal with it. But remember, your level of accuracy, what you're looking for is more stylistic. So here I'm raising the shoulder just a little bit. There's a thing that happens when we do figures where our figures become either really muscular or they lose muscle. It's all depending on how you're looking at the subtle curves of the negative space. And sometimes, well, you may say it's proportion too. Can you read? Can you see the proportions? But it really, if you can see the shape of the negative space and you can read it with a little more precision, you find yourself not having that problem where the arms become skinnier or really buff. Nice shadow right underneath this arm. And sometimes these dresses, they take a little extra work. But I want you to, again, simplify the information. What are the most important lines that we're going to be dealing with here? I see this one. The notan is showing me. I see this one. And I'm adding a little gesture to it. A little extra curve. A little kind of playful exaggerated movement. And I'm going to save all the rest for color. A couple more things here with this notan as we get into the area here that usually causes tension. Because we get too caught up in details. So all you want to see again is that simple read of light and shadow. Now I'm going to go right into the face here. Well, actually, let me finish this first here. We're at the bottom. Work a little more shadows. And it's amazing how easy it is to draw, in this case, a foot, a shoe. We saw that last week. With negative space, and now seeing just the amount of information you need to put in here. I'm going to simplify it, and I see a little bit of shadow in between, going right into the edge of this toe, and that's it. It really just comes down to that. How much and what is the amount of information you're going to put in there. A little more complex over here on this side. There's more of the actual shoe to deal with, I feel. I didn't want to make this foot so dark because I want to use the colors and the values of those darker colors to develop the shadows a little more. But yeah, we have things going on here. Just adding a few lines. There it is. That's it. It comes down to, can you see the light? Can you see light and shadow and what they're doing to this subject? And the more honest you are, yes, I can see it. So let me just add all these lines. Simplify it, the better you're going to do. Just going to add a few lines right in here as we have this beautiful shadow going on. Trying to simplify it as much as I can. Right into the eye. And I need a little more definition here because there is a lot of shadow. So we're missing out on a lot of information. And like I said, I'm going to want to do that with color. A few lines pointing me right here. There's no information here or all the way into this hat. So I'm going to stop there, grab my brush. Hopefully everyone is right there with me, and go back to color. See, there's that hairdo that I didn't really see. I mean, you could kind of make out what was happening here. So, because of the way we're working, you were working off of that image the entire time. Usually you would look at both. You'd be looking back and forth, confirming the information you're getting from the notan. Ideally, you're paying attention at both simultaneously. And give it a really nice this would be really nice to make it very light and washy with those perfect little specks of white all around. So I'm going the opposite way, adding the green, leaving that. And you could do it the opposite way as well, with washes of green and then lifting. Haven't dealt much with background, but we'll do a little more. Maybe we will have a little more time next week, and we'll do a few touches of background. But again, because you're working with such simplified information, the question is, how much of it do you need? How will it help? How will it hurt? How will it complement my figure? I'm going with very simplified colors here. May have shifted. Hey, that's not the color of her hair. Well, taking liberties. Few artistic licenses. Also, lots of color pencil patches here would work beautiful. I'm sorry, watercolor. Color pencil marks would be great. And I remember I had all those early pencil lines in there. So as I develop this, I'm going to go a little bit into the face, preserve some of that light that I wanted to. Oof, there's a little bit of ink bleeding. It wasn't fully dry. And that's the other thing about the technique. You would want to really make sure you're working at the proper pace. Really wanted to do this, but it's going to be a mess if I touch it. So let me just go back here, and I'm going to go ahead and add some of those shadows that I saw earlier. But like I said, this really not the way you should do it. You should really wait until it's the proper time for the technique. So layering these colors of shade of shadow should be done when it's fully dry. And there's a lot of wet areas here that are going just to get kind of dirty colors. But hey, that's a level of freedom. You want to be cautious. but not lose total sense of still being able to do, oops, there it is. I'm going to try to manage this, add that little bit of red to the face here. And I'm just going to add a touch what we see back here. Also complement that green. So not necessarily a watercolor drawing, but the watercolor techniques that would really bring this alive in terms of, once again, stylistically, how I would want this to really come together. Could be obviously when this was dry. I could have added a lot of the features here with color pencil instead. Have that show up other areas of your drawing. And there we have it. The Notan series. So looking at last week, our negative space, and adding this week's Notan studies to it. I can't wait to see what you guys did. And I hope you enjoyed it.